In the midst of the modern world's emotional turbulence, many people find themselves in a difficult situation. To prevent suffering, they believe they must become cold, remote, and nearly invisible. It is typical to hear words such as, "I can't show weakness," or "feeling too much only makes me suffer." There is a deeply held conviction that being emotionally untouchable necessitates the loss of sensitivity, empathy, and, in many cases, one's own humanity. But to what extent is this true? The study of depth psychology, particularly Carl Jung's seminal work, shows a fascinating contradiction. True emotional invulnerability does not arise from coldness, but from the conscious integration of our own internal contradictions. According to Jung, there is a rarely studied path between extreme vulnerability and emotional hardness, known as the transcendent function. Few people realize that this idea, created by Jung in his 1944 book Psychology and Alchemy, refers to a profound psychological skill that goes well beyond simple defense mechanisms. The transcendent function is the ability to maintain seemingly overwhelming tensions within oneself, such as agony and peace, firmness and compassion, closeness and distance, without breaking down. It is not about picking a side, but rather about achieving a higher synthesis that transforms opposites into something new. However, most people remain trapped in the logic of the ego, which seeks to defend itself by erecting ever higher walls. This strategy generates a dangerous side effect. The more the individual defends themselves, the more isolated and empty they feel. The ego believes that in order to prevent pain, it must eliminate everything that is inconvenient, disturbing, or contradicting. However, according to Jung, this posture merely exacerbates suffering, since what is suppressed in the unconscious emerges in distorted forms, emotional eruptions, physical ailments, or existential crises. The primary question in this discussion is whether it is possible to be emotionally untouchable without becoming frigid. Carl Jung would answer yes, but it demands courage, discipline, and, most importantly, a strong dedication to the process of individuation. He argued that true power is found in the psyche's flexibility, which can embrace both brightness and darkness. Truly untouchable people are not those who isolate themselves in an emotional cocoon, but those who have learned to dance with their own shadows while maintaining their human warmth. In this video, we'll look at how the transcendent function can be utilized in real life. We will understand, through Jung's lens, how someone can remain emotionally protected without needing to build ice walls around their heart. We will talk about the fight between the ego and the self, the concept of holding the tension supporting opposites without fragmenting, and how the psyche's alchemical process turns deep sorrows into psychological riches.
All of this is intended not just to rouse intellectual curiosity,
but also to provide practical tools to those who are confronted with criticism, rejection, betrayal, or toxic environments, those who do not know how to protect themselves without sacrificing their humanity. Because deep down, the question that echoes in the quiet of many souls is simple. How can I protect myself from the world's hurts without becoming cold and distant? And perhaps by the end of this video, the answer will not only be theoretical, but profoundly transformative. In modern culture, and possibly in any civilization that values independence and strength, there is a deeply ingrained belief that one must become emotionally cold in order to survive. Many people believe there are only two options: be too vulnerable, exposing oneself to the constant risk of being injured, or erect a cold wall around the heart to escape any possibility of pain. This narrative, although seductive, is in Carl Jung's view not only incomplete, but also dangerous. The concept of coldness as a form of protection stems from fear of rejection, humiliation, betrayal, or manipulation. We learn from a young age that expressing our emotions can be viewed as weakness. How many times have we heard the saying, "Don't show what you feel, or people will use it against you"? Popular culture perpetuates this idea by portraying allegedly invincible people as remote, controlled, disinterested figures who do not cry, stumble, or hesitate. They are heroes or heroines who appear untouchable because they have suppressed any hint of humanity that would expose them. But what few realize is the high price paid for this defense. Jung warned that when the ego overprotects itself, it produces a rigid defense mechanism that isolates the individual, not just from suffering, but also from life. Human warmth, authentic joy, and the ability to form meaningful connections are all blocked by the same wall that keeps the arrows of sorrow from getting to us. Coldness comes at a high cost in the form of loneliness, superficial ties, and, in many cases, an existential void. This defensive response may work for a while. Indeed, there are times when we must control our emotions in order to avoid being overwhelmed by them. For example, during a family crisis, an unexpected layoff, or a heartbreaking betrayal. However, living in this condition of emotional containment indefinitely is equivalent to constricting all of the body's muscles without ever releasing. Tension eventually takes its toll. Jung witnessed this numerous times in his patients. People who looked to be strong and resistant to suffering began to exhibit medical or emotional symptoms: chronic worry, insomnia, panic attacks, and outbursts of wrath for no apparent cause. It's as if the unconscious screamed to be heard, bringing to light all the ego tried to hide. Because, according to Jung, the psyche cannot withstand long-term abnormalities. What is pushed into the shadows comes back with a vengeance. There is one more significant aspect. Coldness, when used as a form of protection, paradoxically increases vulnerability. When a person isolates oneself from their emotions, they lose the ability to see nuances in others. They become insensitive to subtleties, to the true intents of others around them. They become more vulnerable to manipulation as a result, exactly because they lose touch with instinct, intuition, and the emotional intelligence that could really keep them safe when they try to suppress their emotions. Furthermore, becoming emotionally frozen impedes learning. Pain, no matter how horrific, teaches essential lessons. Wounds often reveal our limitations, values, and strength. People who protect themselves excessively stop themselves from developing. They become inflexible, predictable, and incapable of changing. Jung believed that individuation, the process by which a person discovers their own self, was severely hampered by this rigidity. So, the big question still stands. If we don't become untouchable by being frigid, how can we do that? How do we protect the heart without becoming a cold fortress? And this is where the concept that can completely change the way we see true emotional strength comes in. In the next part, we will look at the primary concept that Carl Jung introduced to the world, the transcendent function, and why it is maybe the only true method to be untouchable without being cold. If this content makes sense to you, please subscribe and support the channel. Thank you for being here. At the heart of Carl Jung's analytical psychology is a concept that, although little known outside the deeper circles of psychology, possesses immense transformative power: the transcendent function. Understanding this concept is critical for those who want to be emotionally untouchable without hardening or isolating oneself from the outside world. Jung discovered through decades of clinical research that the human psyche is not designed to function just at extremes. Within each person, competing forces exist: love and hatred, courage and fear, compassion and apathy, the desire for connection and the desire for seclusion. According to him, human misery is frequently caused not by the existence of two opposites, but by the ego's desperate struggle to choose only one, suppressing or denying the other. The transcendent function is Jung's solution to this problem. It is a mental process in which consciousness and the unconscious combine to create something wholly new. A greater synthesis that combines the poles rather than rejecting any of them. It is not a mediocre compromise between two extremes, but rather a third option capable of overcoming contradiction. For example, one can genuinely love someone while also feeling the need to set hard limits. The restricted ego thinks, either I love and offer myself entirely, or I protect myself and create barriers. However, transcendent function enables one to sustain the tension between these forces and establish an internal space where one can love while maintaining clear boundaries without guilt, without internal violence. Another example is coping with the anguish of betrayal. The ego seeks simple solutions: either entirely forgive and forget, or brutally remove the individual from one's life. Jung believed that the true path entailed enduring sorrow without denying it and transforming it into inner growth. The transcendent function does not eradicate pain, rather it modifies its meaning. It is critical to recognize that for Jung, this process is more than just intellectual. It is not enough to objectively recognize that opposites are at work. Emotion, imagination, symbolism, and dreams are all part of the transcendent function, which connects the conscious and unconscious minds. The synthesis frequently takes the form of symbolic images, epiphanies, or even dreams that provide answers that the rational mind would never discover. As a result, Jung connected the transcendent function with the activity of medieval alchemists. They attempted to produce the philosopher's stone by combining opposing substances, such as the sun and moon, the masculine and the feminine. For Jung, alchemy was a perfect analogy for the psychic process by which we change suffering into wisdom, tension into peace, and anguish into purpose. According to Jung, the greatest mistake is believing that we have to choose between being vulnerable and strong. True strength comes from sustaining the tension of opposites without rushing to find an easy solution. Because transformation takes place in the difficult zone of uncertainty, grief, and ambivalence. But how to begin cultivating this skill in real life? How to learn to hold the tension without collapsing under the weight of one's own emotions? How not to succumb to the anxiety that arises when we do not immediately choose one side or the other? This is precisely what we are going to explore in the following section, when we will analyze one of Jung's most difficult and profound concepts, keeping the tension, or the art of enduring opposing feelings without breaking. The conflict between the ego and the self is possibly the most fundamental and misunderstood in the wide realm of Jungian psychology. For Jung, this is the quiet conflict that determines practically all human decisions, sorrows, and existential issues. Understanding this interaction is critical for those who want to remain emotionally detached without falling into the trap of coldness. Jung defined the ego as the portion of the psyche that identifies with awareness. The I is the one who claims to be so-and-so with such opinions, tastes, and anxieties. It is the center of willpower, social identity, and rationality. The ego believes it has control and, to some level, it does. It is critically necessary for navigating the outside world, making decisions, defining boundaries, and defending oneself against immediate danger. However, the biggest fallacy about the ego is that it is everything and, more importantly, that it can provide complete protection from the world's ills. Jung persisted in demonstrating how this delusion of independence is exactly what weakens us. This is due to the ego's restricted and biased perception of reality when it is isolated. It categorizes everything into strict categories: good or bad, right or wrong, vulnerable or protected. It seeks immediate responses, complete control, and the delusion that it can protect the individual from any misery. Here's where the self comes in. Jung defined the self as the core and entirety of the psyche, which includes both consciousness and the unconscious. The ego is not simply another aspect of the mind. It is the instance that contains all we are, including what we do not know about ourselves. It is the source of balance, purpose, and existential significance. The self is geared toward the entirety of human experience, whereas the ego is focused on the external environment and social adaptation. Jung believed that true emotional protection comes from the self, rather than the ego, because the self, by reconciling opposites, produces a much stronger interior security than any wall created by the ego. When someone is connected with themselves, they do not need to react defensively to criticism, rejection, or betrayal, because they know they are complete. It is not that the person does not feel suffering, rather they do not break down in the face of it. There is something greater, an interior axis that remains stable. One of Jung's most profound observations was that the more the ego seeks to protect itself through tight control, the more it disconnects from the self and, paradoxically, becomes more susceptible. This is true for people who live tense, distrustful, secluded lives, always scared of being injured, and hence end up living in a constant state of tension or bitterness. The ego is constantly at conflict. However, the opponents in this conflict are internal and are projected onto the outside world. In contrast, the self does not need to battle, provides natural protection derived from the sense of wholeness. Jung defined the self as both the center and the margins. It is the fixed point around which everything rotates, but it is also the sum of all the pieces. Living in harmony with oneself entails admitting our contrasts, acknowledging our shadows, but also believing in the potential of unification. That is why people who appear unapproachable without being chilly frequently exude genuine serenity. They are aware of their pains, but they do not define themselves by them. They understand that they can love strongly without sacrificing their identity, can set boundaries without being cruel, since their power comes not from hardening, but from an intimate connection with themselves. However, connecting with oneself is not straightforward. It is not a button to be pressed. It is a process that necessitates experiencing intense internal conflict without rushing to simple conclusions. This is where a significant concept emerged in for many. One of the most difficult aspects of Jungian psychology, the art of keeping the tension, that is enduring contradicting feelings without collapsing. In the next part, we will look more deeply into this idea and learn how it can actually become a way to turn pain into wisdom, helping us create an invisible protection that keeps us strong without making us lose our human feelings. One of the hardest things for people is to stay calm when caught in the middle of their own emotions. When someone betrays us, criticizes us, or pushes us away, every part of us wants quick relief. We might burst out in anger or say hurtful things, or we might shut everything down inside, hiding the pain until it turns into a quiet, tight feeling in our chest. Our ego often wants us to choose a side right away. Either we become cold and act like we don't care, or we fall deeply into our suffering. But Jung saw a different way, one that is hard, but also freeing, learning how to stay in the middle of the emotional tension. For Jung, staying with this tension was necessary for something deeper to happen. He called it the transcendent function. Without staying with the tension, there is no real change, only the same painful patterns repeating over and over again. He understood that when we avoid dealing with opposite feelings, we're just pushing them into our unconscious mind, where they grow stronger and start causing problems. That's where things like anxiety, depression, sleeplessness, sudden anger, or even physical illness from stress can come from. But staying with the tension doesn't mean we have to live in constant pain or act like suffering is something good. It means something more thoughtful. Being aware of the pain while not letting it drag us down or make us pretend it's not there. It's about having the bravery to look inside ourselves and admit, I feel both anger and love at once. I want to pull away, but I also want to be close. I am hurt, but I can still be kind. It's in that strange and uncomfortable space, where feelings are mixed, that something new can begin to grow. Jung said the human mind is like an old chemistry lab. When you mix two things that don't go together, the heat from their clash creates change. In the same way, when we hold the tension between our conflicting emotions without rushing to pick a side, something fresh can appear. A new way of seeing things, a sudden insight, or a deeper understanding of ourselves or the problem we are facing. A clear example of this idea is how we deal with the pain of being betrayed. The ego quickly wants to decide what to do. Either forgive everything and act like nothing happened, or completely cut the person off and shut down emotionally. But holding the tension means admitting that the pain is real and valid, while also understanding that this pain is not the full story. It means allowing ourselves to feel hurt, but not letting that pain destroy our ability to trust others again in the future. It's about asking ourselves, what lesson is this pain trying to teach me? What hidden value might be found in this painful experience? Another good example is when we face strong criticism. The ego's first reaction might be to fight back with anger or fall into harsh self-judgment. But a person who can stay with the emotional tension can ask, is there any truth in what was said? Or is this more about the other person than about me? More importantly, they can stay calm and not be pulled into someone else's emotional storm. What makes this process so hard is that it takes time. The ego wants fast answers, quick fixes, and total clarity. But the deeper part of us, the unconscious, works at a much slower, more patient pace. Jung compared this to the old practice of alchemy, which needed slow, steady heat and careful attention to change ordinary lead into shining gold. So, holding the tension is really a form of emotional and spiritual training. It means not choosing the easy way out, even when everything inside us wants to run away from the pain. And here is something very important. This is not just about suffering for the sake of suffering. It's about letting that suffering help us grow and change. Because for Jung, every wound that we are brave enough to face becomes a step toward becoming a more complete person. That's why he believed the goal is not to be perfect, but to be whole. The pain doesn't simply disappear, but it starts to make sense. It becomes a meaningful part of our personal story, not something that destroys us, but something that shapes us. But then, a big question naturally comes up. If this ability to hold tension is so powerful, how can we really turn our pain into something valuable? How can we turn emotional lead into inner gold? This is exactly what we'll explore in the next part, where we'll look at the idea of alchemical synthesis. How the soul can take painful experiences and turn them into emotional wisdom and strength, all while keeping our human kindness intact. According to Carl Jung, the human mind has a powerful ability. It can turn suffering into something deeply valuable. He compared this process to alchemy, the ancient art, where people tried to turn common metals like lead into pure gold. But Jung didn't see alchemy as just a chemical experiment, saw it as a deep symbol for how the human soul works. And that's where the idea of alchemical synthesis comes in, the ability to take what looks like nothing but pain and turn it into meaning, inner growth, and personal strength. When people hear alchemy, they often think of magic or trickery. But Jung believed it was actually a symbolic way for ancient people to describe very real inner processes. The alchemists had a saying, solviti coagula, which means dissolve and bring together again. In psychology, this means letting go of old parts of ourselves, so that something new and better can grow in their place. Jung believed this is exactly what happens when we face trauma, loss, or major life struggles. Pain, in his view, isn't life going wrong, it's life asking us to grow. But there's one key thing. We have to be willing to stay in that tension and not run away from it with quick fixes. As we saw earlier, if someone tries to hide or avoid their pain, it doesn't go away. It just stays buried and starts to damage the mind from the inside. But if that person is brave enough to enter the experience fully even, though it's scary, then the pain can become a doorway to wisdom, compassion, and inner strength. This process of alchemical synthesis begins with something very important, a conscious decision to surrender. It doesn't mean we enjoy the pain or pretend it's good. It means we recognize it's real and must be accepted as part of our journey. Often, this kind of deep change shows up in powerful dreams, creative images, or sudden insights. Jung noticed that many people, after going through intense pain, would start having symbolic dreams. These dreams would show a kind of inner healing, images like a sacred marriage, the sun and moon becoming one, or shining golden figures. These weren't just beautiful symbols, they were signs that the person's inner world was finding peace between their opposing emotions, and turning confusion into clarity. A classic example of this is someone who experiences a deep betrayal. At first, all the ego sees is damage, broken trust, pain, and anger. But through the inner process of alchemy, this same experience can help the person learn stronger boundaries, more self-respect, and the ability to recover emotionally. In the end, they don't just go back to how they were. They become more grounded, more self-aware, and less likely to fall into painful patterns again. This is what we call psychological gold. Another important part of this inner alchemy is that it builds a special kind of emotional protection, something Jung called transparent shielding. This doesn't mean building cold, hard walls to keep people out. It means having a quiet inner strength that lets you stay kind and open, without being so easily hurt by criticism, manipulation, or emotional chaos around you. The strength comes not from hiding, but from deep inner roots. So, people who have been through real pain and have faced it with open eyes often give off a different kind of energy. They seem calm and solid, not because they haven't suffered, but because they used their suffering to grow. Jung believed the goal of life is not to escape suffering, but to find meaning in it. Real gold in life isn't the lack of pain, it's the ability to face that pain and say, this didn't destroy me, I've become stronger. But then comes the practical question, how do we actually live this out every day? How do we have loving relationships, friendships, and work lives without falling into the same traps, being too cold or too emotionally open? How do we keep our warmth without being overwhelmed by other people's chaos? That's exactly what we'll explore in the next part. We'll look at how to apply these ideas from Jung in real life. From small moments to big challenges so we can truly become emotionally untouchable, without ever losing our humanity. As we come to the end of this journey, one clear truth stands out, a truth that may feel strange at first, but is also freeing. Being emotionally untouchable doesn't mean being hard, cold, or distant. It means building an inner strength that comes from learning how to balance the opposite forces within us. Many people think that to avoid pain, they must toughen up. Not showing emotion is showing weakness. That the only way to stay safe from life's hard moments is to build strong walls, so no one can hurt them. But through Jung's ideas, we see that this belief is actually a trap, because the same wall that protects us from pain also keeps out joy, real love, and deep human connection. True power doesn't come from shutting down emotionally. It comes from the ability to live with our inner conflicts without falling apart. Jung showed us that the human soul is a place where opposites live side by side. Love and anger, closeness and distance, trust and fear. And the way to become truly untouchable without losing our heart is to learn to live in that in-between space, to stay present with the tension, to resist quick answers, to hold steady even when the pain is strong. Holding the tension is a brave act. It means facing pain without denying it. It means looking at our own darkness and accepting it as part of who we are. It means having the patience to stay in discomfort until something new and healing rises from it. This is why Jung saw alchemy as the perfect symbol for the inner life. Just like the old alchemists tried to turn metal into gold, we too can turn our pain into wisdom, our wounds into strength, and our confusion into peace. This is the true psychological gold. And when we reach this state of transformation, we develop that transparent shield Jung spoke of. We no longer live at the mercy of others' moods or opinions. We are steady in ourselves, but still open, still warm, still deeply human. This is what it means to be untouchable without losing our humanity. But this isn't a one-time achievement. It's a journey, a daily choice, a repeated decision to stop running, to turn inward, even when what we find scares us, and to trust that, out of that inner storm, something strong and clear can be born. If there is one thing this video aims to make clear, it is that you do not have to choose between being strong or being sensitive. You can be both. You can love deeply and at the same time set boundaries. You can be vulnerable without being fragile. You can suffer and still remain whole. Now I want to know from you, in which area of your life do you feel you most need to find this balance between strength and vulnerability? Is there a situation where you felt you closed off too much, or on the contrary, exposed yourself more than you should have? Write in the comments your story may inspire or help others who are going through the same dilemma. And if this video brought important reflections for you, be sure to subscribe to the channel, leave your like, and share it with someone who needs to hear this. And keep watching. The next video is just as important as this one for your process of self-knowledge and inner strengthening. Because in the end, the battle between ego and self is just beginning.